Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with author, successful architect, and modern-day cowboy Bob West. For 35 years, he was a successful architect living in Boulder, Colorado. Currently, in his second life, he is living his dream life as a cowboy and rural cattle rancher. He battles daily with his internal conflicts and heartfelt concerns of the future of the American West. With the resounding popularity of Taylor Sheridan's imaginary Western series so beautifully brought to life on the TV show Yellowstone and the subsequent sequels 1833 and 1923, he's a guy onto something. Bob's story, told in the book 20 Miles of Fence, Blueprint of a Cowboy, although not nearly the grandeur and scope of the TV epic, it tells of his real-life experiences, written with self-depreciating humor and some brutal honesty. He's got a fascinating story so far. Enjoy.
Well, good deal. Well, it's great to meet you, and I want to begin our conversation before we get into your life and your work by asking, we're on the 4-year anniversary of this pandemic. How did you survive the pandemic, and how did it change you?
Well, we're somewhat isolated up here. However, we own two businesses. One, we had a bed and breakfast for ranch stays, so people could come and enjoy the West. We still have cattle drives here and things like that. We got people really from all over the world for like 5 or 6 years without even advertising, just by kind of word of mouth. And we had to shut it down because, the rooms are in our house, and we just didn't want to bring COVID into, our lives. And so, unfortunately, we had to shut that business down. But we also bought, after we shut the B&B down, it was actually before that, because we went through COVID, we bought the Forks Mercantile and Saloon. And it's this old 1875 stage stop on a kind of a major highway between Fort Collins and Laramie. And it's like going back in time when you go upstairs, because you've got all these cattlemen with cowboy hats and their chaps and all that, sitting around drinking beers and whatever. And so we obviously had to make it through that as well. And fortunately, we were able to keep our mercantile open that entire time. We had to close the restaurant bar, obviously, but we were able to survive that as well. So, it was interesting owning those businesses and having to try to maneuver them, because both of them were obviously based upon having the public in your space. So it definitely impacted us.
For sure. So let's go to right now, today, 2024. If I was to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day, and one of the kids looked up and said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Well, I was an architect for 35 years, and I gave that up to become a cowboy. And so I would answer them today, I'm a cowboy on a ranch in northern Colorado.
And you would be one of those kids' favorite people ever, I have no doubt. How did you get to this point? Talk to me a little bit. Actually, let's go back to when you were in the third grade before we get there. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Well, maybe not in third grade, but soon thereafter, I always wanted to be an architect. But I have pictures of, I grew up all over the place. My father worked for General Motors, Chevrolet. And so I call myself a General Motors brat because I moved every 5 years. But I was born in Colorado. So there's lots of pictures of me on my grandfather's farm down in Denver, which no longer exists. It's I-70 interstate right now, on a horse, and there's pictures of me with my brother, with guns and all that stuff. And so I'd say both. I really achieved what I wanted to be as a kid. It's rare.
So, yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, it's dream realized. So talk to me a little bit about your career a little bit. How did your career in architecture go, and what ultimately made you say, you know what, I'm going to become a cowboy. This is my destiny.
Well, that's really the basis of my book that I just got published last year. It's called 20 Miles of Fence, Blueprint of a Cowboy. And, my career was incredible. I graduated out of the University of Colorado in 1979. I started at a great firm in Boulder. It went bankrupt in 1986. We were actually selling the furniture out of the conference room when a developer I knew came in and hired us and saved the firm. We built it in 10 years to the largest firm in Colorado. And it's doing great today, even after, I left the business. But I did all kinds of incredible work all along the Front Range for years. And so that was a great experience. The problem was I was living in Boulder, Colorado on a little ranchette with a couple of horses. In the backyard, I had 2 kids and a stepson, and they had discovered, this was in 1993, they discovered Nintendo, which of course was the first gaming device, and they spent their days in the basement watching TV playing that crazy game. And I told my wife, we've got to do something about this. I was so busy, I was working 65 hours a week. They would see me on television, at some city council meeting, and that's about it, except for on the weekends. So I said, hey, we need to buy a place somewhere in Colorado or nearby within 3 hours where we can take these kids where there's no television and teach them about the outdoors and nature and, just get them away from this craziness. And so we went on a 2-year march trying to find something, and bizarrely, we ended up buying a cattle ranch in Wheatland, Wyoming, which is north of Cheyenne by about an hour and a half. And it was a 150 cow-calf operation, and I knew nothing about cattle. And so the book, it talks about all the crazy lessons I learned. Thank goodness there was the guy we bought it from was 78 years old. He had a heart attack, and his kids did not want to keep ranching. So we ended up getting this ranch, a spectacular place, 2.5 miles of the North Laramie River, incredible fishing, just undescribable place. It was an Indian skinning camp, buffalo skinning camp back in the 1800s, and there was still arrowheads and things sitting right on the ground. Tremendous place. It's called the Devil's Wash Tub. And so we did not move up there. We would leave at noon on Friday afternoon, and I would spend my weekends with the kids and with the ranchers up there, and we learned the ranching business over 10 years. And so, kind of sad story, I ended up getting a divorce, losing that ranch, and ended up with this ranch here in Livermore. And I never expected to own another ranch, but by happenstance, I ended up with this ranch here, and I ended up at the top of my career quitting cold turkey and just becoming a cattle.
That's
and now,
wild.
Now we raise Scottish Highland cattle, which I don't know if you know anything about cattle, but they're really popular now. They're those hairy horned cattle that you see in all of the areas. People just love these things, and so that's what I'm doing now.
Wow, that's fascinating. When I was in my late 20s, I worked for HNTV, and I built their database. I worked with the architects and engineers, and I remember the old school architects would come in and that was when computers were starting to become a thing, and there was some of them that were like, I'm doing all this by hand. I'm not doing the computer stuff, and they had fascinating tales of all these structures that they constructed over the years. What were some of your highlights? What were some of the proudest structures that you were a part of in your career?
Well, one of the reasons I did start architecture was because of hand drafting. I was really good at it. It's an art form that's no longer around. The drawings were really like art pieces. They're just so beautiful. And I never learned the computer. I got to the point, we had 275 employees in 5 offices, and I just had guys that were computer jockeys sit next to me, and they were my right hand. And I would do sketches and throw it over on the table, and I just work with them through the entire project. I did a lot of incredible work, but some of probably my more famous work is down at the Broadmoor Resort Hotel in Colorado Springs. I did over 6 years of work on that campus, and really beautiful projects. I was working for Phil Anschutz, and of course there's a lot of money there, so you could do what you needed to do to make incredible projects. But I've worked on a lot of different things. I got our firm involved in working down in Antarctica, and they're working down there today still on McMurdo and some of the American study areas down there where they have scientists, looking at the environment. That was interesting. I did a tea factory for Celestial Seasonings Tea, which was fun, a lot of fun, when you're working with, the kind of things that they do in that tea manufacturing plant, really interesting. So, it's that kind of work, very diverse, did lots of custom houses for CEOs that were moving to Colorado up in the mountains. And so did a lot of high rises in Denver, did a lot of historical renovation as well. So quite a broad diversity. One of the things that I loved the most was I did fire stations. And fire stations are important, to the community. And how I started that was I looked around in Colorado, and I'm looking at these fire stations. This was, 30 years ago or more. And they were all kind of lousy. And so I just went to a fire station. I knocked on the door, and I talked to the chief. And I said, if you could redo this fire station, what would you do with it? What would you change? What doesn't work? And I started doing fire stations, and I've done some of the best fire stations in the United States.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So you're obviously a very highly driven person. Who's been a hero or an inspiration in your life?
Oh, good question. Good question. Well, probably, this is an easy answer, but probably my father. My father was a very honest guy. He was on the Burma Road in World War II, fighting for our country. He was really successful in his career at Chevrolet. I was the luckiest kid on the block because he'd bring a Corvette home, and you'd hear the rumble down the street. We lived on a cul-de-sac in Pittsburgh at that time, and all the neighbor kids would run out to see the car. I was so lucky. And of course, I always had the greatest cars of all time, because I got a new one every year. But he was amazing because he had this, very heavy demand corporate job, and he would be my baseball coach. He'd be my Boy Scout leader. He would find time to spend with his kids, and just an amazing man. So he's the guy who instilled, my beliefs. So I would definitely say him.
So my dad was a car salesman for years and years, and he'd always come home with a new car, and he'd always just tilt back like he was the king of the world. Now, he never had a vet or anything, but he would always have a Cadillac or some kind of fancy car. That was one of the perks of the job. So I remember that well. Let me ask you this. Of all of the architectural structures that you've visited and traveled to around the world, what's the one that's the most marveling to you? What's the one that's either the most beautiful or perplexing by the way that they put it together?
Oh, easy answer. Falling Water in Pennsylvania by Frank Lloyd Wright. If you've ever get a chance to go there as just even a layman, it is breathtaking what was done in the 30s. Absolutely breathtaking place.
So if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating or interesting, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
Elon Musk. Definitely.
He's number one. He's always number one.
Yep.
Yeah.
I find him absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And he's so smart, and I just think that he is an amazing person.
I think we're too close to what he's doing right now. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it takes a little time to separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, he's clearly a genius. He's clearly an innovator, but I don't know that we're going to be able to absorb the magnitude of him until a little ways down the road.
I would agree with you.
So you're a man that's done quite a bit in your life, and I'm curious at this point, you know, really truly going after that dream that you had early on. What's your motivator every day to wake up, to be you, to evolve, and to continue to just march on and do it in style? How does that work for you?
Well, I don't sit around, I can tell you that. I get involved in issues that are important to me, and I bring an outsider kind of different viewpoint to solve problems. I'll give you an example. This may be longer than you want, but 4 years ago, someone came to me and they said that there was a lawsuit on Colorado rivers. We're one of the only states where the landowner still owns the bottom of the river, so it's private property. The water is not. But this guy was getting sued down on the Arkansas south of here, and he had no money to defend himself. And so I sprang into action because I believe in private property rights, and I got a hold of a group called the Creekside Coalition, who's been protecting our property rights here in Colorado for years. They were all like 85, and they were tired, and they didn't have any money. And I asked them, well, what is your mailing list to get donations? They said, well, it's about 300 people, and it's 25 years old. And I said, well, I'll take care of that. I hired 2 college kids to go on the HuntX app, which is an app that's really cool for hunters, where you can just plug in a piece of property and get the owner's address and contact information so you can ask them for permission. I had them line up for 2 months with a Rand McNally map, and they yellowed out every river in Colorado, and I handed a Excel list of landowners on rivers in Colorado of 8,000 people 2 months later, so that they could get money to defend this lawsuit. The lawsuit took 4 years. I was heavily involved in all the strategies in order to win. We won 7-0 at the Colorado Supreme Court, and now we still have the bottom of our rivers intact.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a wonderful story. So I guess that kind of leads me to my next question. What are you the proudest of all of these things that you've done and accomplished and evolved and overcome? At this point in your life, what are you the proudest of?
That's a good question. I'd have to think on that one. That's a stumper. I guess, I could answer a lot of things, but I'm trying to give you, the best answer.
Sure.
I guess I would say trying to hold on to my beliefs in a very difficult world today. And those beliefs have to do with honor, integrity, things that I believe you have to have in order for a society to survive. And those things were instilled in me. When I hear that West Point, because of my father, just dropped one of the mission statements, duty, honor, country, I just can't stand it. So what I guess my answer would be, I've been able to, in my opinion, maintain that throughout my life, and that's what I continue to try to do. So that's my answer.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, all of your readers, everyone that's known you. but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, I think that's easy. I'm an architect cowboy.
I like it. So if anyone wants to delve further into your story and get the book, learn more about you, reach out, anything about your world, how can they do that?
I have 2 Facebook pages. It's Robert Bob West and Whiskey Bell Ranch, and Bell is with an E on the end, and you can see what I do on a daily basis at the ranch. The book is available on Amazon or through Bison Publishing, University of Nebraska Press.
Mr. West, this has been illuminating. Thank you, sir, for your story. Thank you for your time. Best of luck. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.